Hello everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to Tutored. Welcome to a new online experience on our platform. I'm really excited to be here to start this new appointment with you. But first, just a quick presentation. I'm Giuseppe, and today I'm not alone. You can see next to me my colleague Erika. Hi Erika, how are you?
Hi everybody, I'm fine. I'm ready to start.
Great. We are both part of the Tutor marketing and communication team. However, the protagonist of this event is Jake Berry, who will bring us into the dynamic and relationships inside one of the biggest company because he's the project manager at Microsoft. Hi, Jake.
Hey, how are we doing? Happy to be here.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for accepting our invitation and having made such an interesting agenda. So I'm trying to share my screen. Jake, if you
I can stop. Yeah,
interrupt your yes.
yeah, absolutely,
Perfect.
no worries.
Okay, so we have an interesting and also dense agenda. So I'll take just some minutes to tell you something more about Tutored before giving the floor to Jake and you, because today you have the possibility to ask him your curiosities, your questions, and your doubts. So let's start with the question: who are we? We are Tutored. We are a startup. We were born in 2014, and now we are in Italy, based in Milan. And we like defining ourselves as the point of contact between students, young graduates, and companies, which is our goal, our remarkable goal. We want to bridge the gap between university studies and the transition into the world of work. We know that this passage is not often easy, it's not a piece of cake. So we want to help students, we want to help our community realize their ambitions and so to find their best job. How? Thanks to our cutting-edge structure. On one end, we have students, young graduates, and undergraduates, so our large community. And on the other end, we collaborate with a lot of companies, big companies, but also small and medium-sized ones. And in the middle, you can see our main products, and so online experiences and job fairs. Erika.
Thank you, Giuseppe, for your introduction. So as you said, our main goal is to help students and young graduates find the right job opportunity and to let them find the most suitable career path. And we want to achieve this goal organizing our online experiences, which are simple but free on interactive digital appointments in which you can get to know businesses, companies, their teams, and, for example, professional figures as developers or, as today with Jake, project managers. And the aim of these online experiences is to let you know more about those roles that may interest you. And on the other hand, we have the part about companies. We have more than 250 companies which are actively publishing job opportunities on our platform. And the peculiarity is that these job opportunities are strictly related to your academic path. So if, for example, if you are studying marketing, you will find just those job opportunities which are related to marketing roles and figures. And in the next few months, you will also find a lot of paid job opportunities for companies which are located in the UK. So stay tuned. And we are ready to start. But before I let the stage to Jake, I want you to explain a bit how you can use this platform. So you have the chat in which you can write your questions, doubts, curiosity, but you can also turn on your video camera or turn on your microphone. You can ask me and Giuseppe to, we can give you the possibility to turn on your mic. You can ask it in chat or clicking on reactions on the bottom. You can virtually raise your hand and we will be happy to see and hear you, of course, because we want this appointment to be as engaging as possible. And for whatever questions, you can use the chat. And at the end, we will have a session of Q&A in which you can ask whatever you want to Jake.
Jake, it's up to you.
All right, it's over to me.
Yes.
All right, cool. Bear with me, I'll share my screen. In the meantime, yeah, Erika, Giuseppe, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to to walk through a few bits with everybody on the call. So yeah, as far as I heard before everyone joined, I think, yeah, this has been marketed out to people in the East Coast of the US, in the UK and in Italy. So we've got a bit of an international audience. So yeah, excited to go through everything. What I'm going to talk to you today about a little bit is project management at a very high level. We're going to go through a little bit about waterfall, about agile, different ways of managing projects. What does that actually mean as an individual? For someone who's coming out of university or college, or even if you're a postgraduate and you're a few years in role, whatever you're doing in life, what are the common sets of skills and competencies that you'll need to actually succeed in different areas of project management? Something to bear in mind, I come from the perspective of project management, which is very much in software and in technology, but different parts of different industries might have different ways of doing things. But from my observation, actually, there are a lot of transferable skills, different things that make up good project management etiquette in the way we do things day to day. And there's a lot of common ground between everything. A lot of what I reference won't actually be, I've referenced things online through, the Project Management Institute and from Scrum. But everything I'm kind of saying is definitely from my perspective as someone that's been involved for 2 or 3 years. Another thing, do come off mute, put your camera on, ask questions throughout. I want to make it as interactive as possible. So I know Erica and Giuseppe will be monitoring the chat. So maybe put them in there, and then they can vet which ones come through. I don't know how it's going to work, but just put them in the chat, and then we can go from there. So I think I'll just go through the agenda one more time. So I'm going to go through a little about me, my personal and academic journey. What I studied at college, what I enjoyed, what I didn't enjoy, what subjects did I pick, why did I pick them, and ultimately what decisions and choices did I make, which ultimately got me in the position of being a project manager at Microsoft. And then, important to probably have the conversation about actually what is project management, give it a definition so we have something to reference as we go through the presentation. We'll go through waterfall, a little bit about what that is, and in comparison to agile, which is more of a contemporary continuous way of managing projects. And as I said, we'll go through some core skills for success if you're looking to become a project manager in the future, in whatever position that might be. And then for someone like myself, what actually does a day or a week in the life look like? We'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll go into a little bit about some of the tools and processes that I use personally in my day job. And obviously that'll change depending on where you practice project management. And then we'll have 10 minutes or so, I think, at the end for Q&A, but more than happy to take questions throughout. So please do pop them in the chat. Cool. So my personal and academic journey. So I'm 24. I live just outside of London. I've been at Microsoft for all told about 3 years now. But I want to go way back to when I was doing my A-levels or kind of when you're in your final 2 years at like high school. This is when I very much didn't know what I wanted to do with my career. I found like any subject I studied for too long kind of bored me. And I didn't really want to specialize in anything too quickly from such a young age. So when I took my final courses before I went to university, I decided to pick law, English literature, media studies, communication and culture, just to give me like a broad breadth of experiences. I was very much, I was quite literature driven, quite communications heavy, and I really loved the world of kind of media and psychology and advertising. So that's why I picked those subjects, and I absolutely loved them. And ultimately, they kind of gave me that broad skill set and perspective on the world to give me an idea of what I wanted to do at university. As I say, they're kind of mixture of discipline areas, so obviously English literature and law, but obviously vocational areas such as communication, culture, and media. Decided to kind of meld two of them together and do communications of media at Bournemouth University. So I did a Bachelor of Arts in that. Super enjoyable, and a lot of portfolio and project management based activities, and something that I found really resonated with me. There was a lot of flexibility in terms of what we did year on year, and a lot of opportunity to choose the kind of subjects that we wanted to do, which is something that I definitely need in life, is having that agency and autonomy to pick subject areas and to like lead myself into things that I personally love doing. And that's something that project management will definitely enable you to do. But that's kind of where I got my first glimpse in technology. We should learn a lot about digital technology, big data, digital advertising, and all of that sort of stuff, something I felt that was very captivating. Personally, I'm not a technical person, but I always wanted to be within that proximity. So I was trying to find different practices that could get me in that area without actually being like a programmer or a coder or an architect or a consultant, not basically anything that wasn't technical. I was then fortunate enough to actually get an internship at Microsoft. So that was in 2018. So I studied, or at least I did, marketing and communications for their commercial legal team. They oversaw our strategic accounts in the UK. They would look at things such as compliance and ethics in sales. They would manage loads of our senior stakeholders in cybersecurity, in compliance and legal, to give them sort of thought leadership events, to look at artificial intelligence, to look at facial recognition, to look at all these different things and actually think about what are the ethics behind these principles and how can we implement them in a way that's safe for society, and kind of removes bias and is inclusive. Personally, for me, again, someone who gets bored very quickly, being able to jump around loads of different subject areas, loads of different customers, very fast paced, something I loved. And being in that technology world without a technology brain, is super, super, super valuable. And obviously going back to university, writing a dissertation on contemporary technologies and political elections was fantastic, and helped me sort of visualize the career path that I wanted to take. So 2020, as we all know what happened in 2020, the year of COVID-19, came back to Microsoft in a completely digital world. Couldn't go into the office, couldn't go and see friends, couldn't go and see new colleagues, couldn't see customers, couldn't see anybody, working completely off of our laptop. I became a consulting project manager. Where I work, we have loads of different domains that deliver certain different kinds of solutions for our customers. We at Microsoft, we call it the 3 clouds. So it's split between Azure, which is our core computing cloud, obviously modern work, which is our Office, our Teams, our SharePoint, our OneDrive, Exchange. And then we have our Dynamics cloud, which is our Power BI, data analytics, Power Automate, Power Apps. So I was closer into the Azure world, and I still am, delivering projects for customers to deliver some bespoke solutions, sometimes around infrastructure, so getting people into the cloud. There might be things on artificial intelligence and IoT, so very data-driven projects, or there might be contemporary apps, and how we can actually package up apps and use it to serve a common goal for organizations. So yeah, something I've loved doing, and being a project manager has meant I've been able to jump around from project to project, execute and close and move on. So I've worked with a good few customers across different industries, all which have their own different challenges and opportunities, and something I've enjoyed thoroughly. So I wanted to get out of the way, because it's a little bit about me and just some of the choices I made and what I'm doing at the moment. I'm going to ask periodically, Erica, Giuseppe, are there any questions, or is there anything in the chat? Give me a signal.
For the moment, no. So
okay,
we can move on, and then I'm sure that questions will come.
Good stuff. All right, no problem. So let's take a step back and look at what is project management. We all have heard of it, and definitely going through school, going through college, and even your day-to-day, you're probably involved in projects and you probably hear about it day to day. It's a very broad term that's used all over the place, and rightly so, because it does have a very, very, very broad definition. So if you look at the Project Management Institute, which is kind of like the holy grail for project management, they define it as a temporary endeavor to create a product, service, or result. So really the only operative word in that sentence is temporary. There's a set start date and a set end date. And ultimately, if you fulfill your ambitions between that set period of time, you could consider yourself as completing a project. It could be something really simple or something complex. But there has to be an external or internal stimulus that is going to initiate the means of starting that project. And we typically put them in like 4 broad buckets. The first being changing regulatory or compliance requirements. So ultimately, organizations or products will have to change the way their app or their product works to fit a regulatory or compliance need. It might be new market forces, so a reason to create something new and push it out into the world. This might be a new shop, it might be a new product, it might be an entirely new business. Broad business or strategical strategies or improvements to existing processes, products, or services. Now, sometimes we can satisfy quite a lot of those with one project. One example is electric vehicles, which we know are global and ubiquitous, but they weren't 7 or 8 years ago. It was still something, if someone had one, you'd say, oh, that's cool. Is that still a thing? But when we look at electric vehicles, it might be a combination of all 4: new market forces, regulatory and compliance requirements, because we know that we're phasing out petrol and diesel, broad business and technological strategies, right? Let's get to the forefront of this new market, and improvements to existing products. A lot of these cars still exist, and they're tweaks and tunes and refinements to existing things to ultimately give back and sell to customers. Another example might be in the gaming industry. We're noticing now that instead of buying a game for £60 or euros or dollars every year, we're now starting to see the continuous improvement and evolution of games. If we look at what's happening in Fortnite, if we look at what's happening in Rocket League or something like that, regular updates to games instead of that yearly cycle of a start and a shutdown, which is a combination of loads of different strategic and outside forces. Typically, when we look at traditional project management, so you can see why I kind of put the Golden Gate Bridge and why I've put construction. That was the reference point for project management historically from day one. Ultimately, software engineering and software development has taken that model, and it's something that we would traditionally call waterfall. We'll come back to that in a minute. But it's interesting to think that traditionally, when we think of project management, we think of the development of architecture, and those broad principles have followed us into the current day in the digital realm with software development. So when we look at project management, we typically look at them in three kind of broad buckets. So we think of them as projects, programs, and operations. As I said, projects is the easiest way to define projects is a temporary endeavor to achieve something, likely has a start date, definitely has a fixed or variable end date, and really is defined by the activities that you do in the middle, and we'd usually break them up into separate components. Now, projects are temporary. It's a singular endeavor to achieve something tactical or strategic, and it's comprised of a singular delivery team, so a set group of people that sort of work in isolation. But things start to become a bit more complex when we look at programs. Programs, again, are temporary, but they're typically things that can't be achieved just through a project. So you might have 5 or 6, even upwards of 9 or 10 interlinked, networked project teams that will work together to achieve something more cohesive, more holistic. So this might be, especially where I work, we might have something that's multi-cloud. So instead of just working on one data solution, we might have a data solution. We might have a huge Teams rollout. We might have Office 365 that's going out as well. We might have people from adoption and change management to help roll out the change and make sure people are comfortable. We might also have, application development, loads of different things that are going on at the same time. And, it seems logical to have those people talking to each other and have it wrapped up so that the customer has a single point of contact, and we can speak to them and refer to them in terms of this broader goal that we're driving. So kind of trying to break down silos in that way. You typically see it, if you're building sort of like a town or kind of like a leisure center, which is comprising of loads of different components. One singular project team wouldn't be able to do that. It would be loads of interlinked, networked project teams that are spearheaded through a program governance board, which would have a program manager, potentially a program architect, and different people from finance and strategy there as well. Looking at operations, now I was debating whether to include this, but it is just important to consider operations are continuous and not temporary. So you can see, I think we're all visual creatures, so I've tried to make sure I've got loads of pictures on every slide. But the activity in operations will typically have peaks and troughs of up and downs, but it will be continuous, and you'll monitor and control what activities you're doing at set periods of time. But the idea is that this is supposed to be an ongoing effort. You can see in comparison to projects that there's usually a very fast pace of going up and then closing down. And ultimately at that end point, that's when you would have achieved what you'd set out to have done in your project charter, which is basically a preset definitions of done and criteria and so on. Again, it doesn't leverage the same organizational resources. A project is going to have a set budget. Operations might have budgets that operate in slightly different ways, but just something important to point out. Just checking for time, and Erica, anything that's coming in the chat?
Everything's good for timing, and for now, no question.
Okay, good stuff. Cool. All right, so we'll look a bit more specifically at waterfall. Now, this is the most traditional form of project management. It's typically just called the waterfall model, and it's been around since as long as probably human beings can remember. It's not something that's used as much anymore, but it definitely still has its place in the world. So when we think about waterfall, the easiest way to represent it is literally through that picture. The water starts at the top and ends at the bottom. It's a very logical sequence set of activities to get from start to finish. And before you can get to the next task, it's very dependent on what was completed before it. So you can imagine items here at the top to start, and ultimately to finish, you have to get down to the bottom, set sequence of tasks to complete by a set date. Now, the thing is about waterfall, it's very rigid. I mean, it doesn't give people that much freedom to change their mind and ultimately go in a different direction. So it's very much you sort of set your fate at the beginning of the project. And if different requirements come in, or if different regulatory forces or external forces come in, for example, if there's delays, then it's very difficult to rework the project. Ultimately, it leads to a lot of re-project planning. Typically, where I work, it leads to a lot of change requests, a lot of arguments, a lot of escalations, and ultimately becomes a lot of admin and overhead to remediate what are very naturally recurring stimulus in projects. Like I said, this is usually what's happening with construction. You wouldn't be able to build the roof until you've got the foundations. You wouldn't be able to put the doors in until you've got the frames. So, that's very much the idea that has been the guiding principle for how software development has come to be. Now, typically when we think about waterfall, you'll go through set phases. You'll typically go through your initiation phase, your planning phase. You'll then have your plan signed off. You'll go through your delivery, your implementation, you'll do your testing, and then you'll do your handover. So set phases that you fit through, and each will have different activities lined underneath. Now, when we think about planning to integration, you can't start integration until your planning has been signed off. And that's important to notice, because in Agile, the principle is completely turned on its head. So when we're thinking about sort of that it's a very rigid way of doing project management, another thing we sort of then consider is it's also very risky. Things can easily go wrong, and ultimately it could be a waste of money trying to rework things around, and ultimately can cause quite long extensions in projects, which isn't ideal. So as I've got in the bottom here, it's a clear roadmap, which again is a positive, but creates a high margin of error and is very high risk.
Jake.
Yeah.
Do you think waterfall is usable today in a context so fluid, in which everything is changing every day?
No, I don't think it is. No, I don't think it is. I think if you're thinking about the context of like product management and managing applications, like how we see Netflix, how we see Spotify, all these contemporary leading edge apps, yeah, absolutely not. And yeah, we'll come on to that because I will speak about Agile in a little bit, but yeah, there are numerous reasons. And actually, you don't see waterfall being used a lot in software development anymore, unless there's very clear goals and outcomes. And we know for a fact that in 3 to 6 months that won't change. And that's the opportunity. Then we think, right, maybe waterfall. But typically now, especially in software, we see that as a very high risk model of approaching projects.
Great.
So moving on to Agile. Now, this is kind of what we've learned to call the Microsoft delivery approach. Now, it's not Agile, it's the Microsoft delivery approach is an amalgamation of loads of different principles, but it's kind of underwritten by working in an Agile or Scrum mindset. I put this picture in on on kind of the mid right because I think it's super interesting. If I compare it to the bottom, to the previous slide, with Waterfall, we have a predefined set rate of activities to achieve an end result. And as I say, it's all predefined, put in a project plan. We then map all the dependencies together and we start running with it. And typically something will go wrong quite quickly, which means we have to re-baseline things and communicate that back out to stakeholders. And a lot of times that will mean that we have to put more budget into the project. Now, in the modern way of working, and this is especially what's used whenever we create a product. So it's, when we think about how cars are made, we think about how apps and software are made and rolled out to end users. We typically think of Scrum when we think of Agile. Now, the picture I put in the mid right is a very good representation of that. In Waterfall, we would have a plan just to get to number 5, which is a full-blown car. And we wouldn't be able to actually test or use anything until we've completely finished our project plan, which might be in 2 or 3 years' time. Now, with Agile and Scrum, the idea is, right, we can't have a car, but what if we can make a skateboard? Because that's still going to operate in the same way that a car would in terms of getting you from A to B. We can roll it out, they can use it, they can test it, we can get feedback, and we can start to grow the capability and get feedback from users. We might then give you a scooter, and that's still not a car, but it's better than a skateboard, and ultimately it's still functional, and users are getting to use it, we're starting to get feedback, and ultimately we're growing and maturing as a team. Now, over a period of weeks or months or years, you'll get to the car, but you would have actually had that as a live service right from the very beginning. As I say, gaining feedback, working with end users, and evolving requirements as the project goes along. Now, like I say, this is very much how it's done in software, And it's pretty much how we work at Microsoft quite frequently. So it's all underpinned by Scrum and Agile, which is a very continuous approach to project management. It's very much what's done when we build a product. And what we do is we essentially take what we consider a minimal viable product. So we say, what's the least you need to make this functional or make it workable? Let's get an initial set of requirements. And then what we'll do is we'll put them in a backlog. What we'll then do is we'll take that backlog and we'll run a sprint, which is essentially a set period of work every 1 to 2 weeks. And we'll work to deliver a set outcome in those 1 to 2 weeks. And that's typically what we'd call an increment. We would then review that increment after 2 weeks. We'd get feedback from the customer. We'd get feedback from end users, and we'd say, right, how are we going to start to evolve and grow? We would then have planning sessions and refinement sessions where we'd look at the backlog, change a few things around, and we go again in the same cycle. We would then have people testing at the same time. We'd have people doing design and architecture. We'd have people doing the development, the deployment. We'd have people working with the end users to understand, right, what are their requirements? And we start to build all this in as we go. So we're building something very continuous. It's very feedback heavy. And even if we don't have a good understanding on the first day, let's start deployment, let's start driving, let's start growing and bring something out and release early and fail fast. Now, the reason why this is so good is because with Waterfall, if something goes wrong, which is very likely, or if people change their minds on certain things, then it requires a whole host of changing and replanning. Now with Agile, there's no paperwork involved if someone changes their mind. The idea is we get to the end of that sprint, we'll revise the increment or the output, and then we'll just reassess on that Monday in planning what direction we want to go in next. So it's a much quicker, and literally why it's called Agile, a way of approaching what is now a very, very, very quickly evolving customer market. As we know, sort of market forces are changing all of the time. If we look at Instagram in comparison to TikTok, it's only been a couple of years between, you know, the way TikTok has grown and flourished as a platform, and now the kind of the footsteps that Instagram is trying to kind of become TikTok. If Instagram had a 2-year fixed fee Waterfall plan, they would have had to have chucked all that away and lost the 6 months of technical debt that they've just made trying to deploy something that they thought was going to be the future in 2 years' time. Whereas with Agile, they could turn on a sixpence and deliver something which is going to be, that's going to get to market quicker than what some of the products and their competitors are doing. So that's the reason why this works so well. As I say, it doesn't work perfectly in everything. You know, if you are delivering something where there's fixed requirements and it's to fix a particular business need, then of course, Waterfall is still absolutely spot on. You know, if you're creating a new Apple store in Oxford Circus or in Italy or on the East Coast, you're still going to want that Waterfall style approach to make sure we have that quality assurance and everything's planned and thought through. Or, you know, if you're building a house, you're still going to need Waterfall. But where you need to adapt very quickly and get to market first, typically we find that Agile is the choice that they decide to go down. So hopefully that's like a decent overview of kind of what both are. It's very hard to describe unless you're sort of there doing it. But always just think about how quickly people want to get to market and how quickly people would like to respond to change. And if it's software development, obviously it's very high. We know that we have, all of us now probably have the attention span that lasts about 2 minutes before we get bored. So being able to keep us fresh on our toes, especially in software, means that, you know, they have to adapt and respond to forces very quickly.
We have a question from
Go for
Ron. And he asked, could you give an example of an MVP that you worked with?
Yeah, okay, it's a good question. So I've recently worked with a customer on a virtual desktop solution. So for people who don't know, it's basically just working on a desktop on your desktop, which is basically like a server. Now at the time, there were a lot of requirements that they weren't sure about. And we understood that actually a lot of what they needed or what they wanted wouldn't be relevant right from the offset. So the compromise we made as a project team was, well, let's just give you the bare minimum of what you need. Let's have you work on it and use it. And the more you use it, the more we'll start to understand, right, what principles do you need around data, networking, security, monitoring, alerting, all of these infrastructure, very technical driven decisions. What is it that actually matters to you? And then let's start to define and flesh that out once you've started using the platform. So you start to think, right, what's on the critical path and what's nice to have. You isolate the critical path items and you put them into a bit of a prioritized backlog. and then we start moving through in that sense. So we have an MVP sort of driven project plan, and then we also have sort of like a fully fleshed, scaled solution plan, and that's essentially where we would then start looking at driving an MVP. Yeah, so typically it would come to kind of how quickly do you need it, and then let's think about, right, what components do you need, and then let's get that out to you as quick as possible.
So it's like they're delivering something not ready, 100% ready, right?
Not 100% ready, but usable. Okay. Yeah. So an MVP, if someone said to you, I need to get from A to B, then you might build them that skateboard first. You know, and it's not, might not be what they want, but if that means that they can have the skateboard within a week instead of waiting 3 years for the car, a lot of customers would actually prefer to have that, because as they start to evolve and grow the solution, by the time they get to the car, it'll be exactly what is going to satisfy their customer base or their end users. And that's kind of what Agile does for you. You learn as you go.
Okay, yeah.
Sort of thing.
And Giovanni wrote, what are the main downsides, in your opinion, of Agile?
Let me just jump through. What are some of the downsides of Agile? It can be hard to plan. Certainly can be hard to plan. In terms of having, look, there are still a lot of instances where you need to know when you're going to get things signed off, and you need to have key milestones in a project before you can sort of consider it as closed, or you've satisfied the goal. A lot of the time to do that, you need to plan 3-6 months ahead. Of course you do. I mean, if we go back to a typical example of I go back right to the beginning of building the Golden Gate Bridge, that would have needed a 2-year plan in terms of procurement, resources, in terms of rota plans for all of their staff. They would have needed a plan that was going to last about 2-3 years. It would have been very rigid, very signed off, but it needs to be that way, so that they know and have faith that their costs line up with what they've planned. So in that sense, waterfall is fantastic because they're going against a plan. Now Agile wouldn't have worked very well there, because ultimately they probably would have gone halfway through the bridge and then realized that they've run out of money, or now certain resources aren't in play, or they might not have the relevant skills or people available to complete the work. So I would say with Agile and waterfall, it's very context driven, and actually a lot of the time we see that there's a mixed approach. People will take bits of waterfall and bits of Agile and kind of like mesh them together, and we usually call it like waterfall Agile, Wagile, to try and kind of get the best out of both. So look, it's very context heavy, and it usually comes down to having a group discussion before and kind of thinking what's the right approach.
Thank you, Jay.
No worries. I'll check the time. It's 25:02, so we have got plenty of time. So waterfall versus Agile, what's the difference? So with waterfall, I think as I've said, you go through a very rigid sequence of steps. As you can see on the top left, you'd start a feasibility, run through to plan, design, build, test, production, support, and then we're gone and we're out. To succeed in those areas, typically what we'd say, you have to have broad skills across 10 areas. So you can sort of see them on the bottom left, but some of the key ones I'll point out are communications, cost management, and stakeholder management. They are skills that are very true of any area of product management, but especially in waterfall, knowing your stakeholders, knowing your sphere of influence, and knowing who internally needs to hear certain pieces of information is always critical. Communication management obviously ties in with stakeholder management, but knowing what bits to communicate to different people, and cost management, especially in terms of if you're procuring things from outside of the business. If you have people working on your project, you need to understand how much they cost. If they're charging by hour, you need to be able to manage that against a pre-agreed budget from the customer. So super important, obviously, to make sure that you can meet things, meet projects inside budget, scope, and timeline. Another super important item is risk management. A lot of the time things don't go right on projects, and we typically define things as risks or issues. Super important as a project manager that a lot of your time is spent focusing and zooming in on what are the potential risks, and trying to mitigate them as much as possible. And that ties in again with stakeholder and communications management. And when we look at issues, usually we call it just firefighting. How do we sort of remediate certain things, and how do we do it in a way that's going to have the least impact to the overall health of a project. But you can actually see that the skills and the timelines and methodologies are very different with waterfall and Agile. If we look at Agile, so we look at the bottom right image, there's a very continuous cycle of meet, plan, design, code and test it, release, gain feedback, and then we go again. And that will happen continuously. So if we think about how Spotify, how Netflix, how Instagram work, they'll work in that sense, and rightly so as well, ultimately to meet the demand. Underpinned by all of that, in Agile projects, you will have projects or product managers, but you'll also have a Scrum Master. Now, a Scrum Master is somebody who will reinforce the principles and the guiding factors that will ultimately deliver a successful Agile project. So with those different sorts of process groups in the bottom right, the meet, plan, design, code and test, release, and feedback, a Scrum Master will essentially be the backbone that supports best practice across all of those different buckets. So you can see that they have a bit more of like a qualitative cheerleader role, but they need to be super insightful about the industry, about the product, about the customer, and also about their delivery team as well, because you usually in a Scrum team have about 6 to 9 people in them. So you can see sort of being a servant leader, being the process authority, coaching, assisting the product owner, removing roadblocks, defining vision, shielding interference. They have quite a broad role, and some of those skills might not match up with each other, which makes it quite a unique role. It's very vocational, something that I don't think there's any one course will make you a good Scrum Master. I do think it's a collection of skills that you gain over time. But you can see the difference between the two methodologies, the kind of timelined approach, how much we're planning, and ultimately what are those sort of skills and qualities that are going to make you succeed. So I'm not sure if there are any sort of questions around this. I don't know if it's worth just pausing for a minute or two.
For now, I think, I don't know, if you have any questions, we can solve your doubts.
It all sounds good.
Let's see. So except for building houses, which are the main fields in which waterfall is still the main methods to project?
It really depends. I mean, I think a lot of infrastructure-based work is obviously where we're still seeing waterfall used a lot. I think a lot in manufacturing. I think waterfall still used quite heavily. I think a lot in utilities, how electricity and how water works is still very waterfall heavy. I think areas that require probably not as much innovation and as quick a response to markets still rely on waterfall quite heavily. I think, as I say, it really comes down to how responsive you need to be. If you can guarantee in 2 years that you want to be in a certain place, the more you can plan that, then the better waterfall is. If you know in 2 months that things need to change, or if you know that you don't have all the answers right now, but you want to get somewhere at the same time, then yeah, that's when you should lean more towards Agile. I mean, I work a lot in public sector, and they love the idea of Agile, but you know, they're very waterfall driven, and a lot of the time that leads to bottlenecks, inefficiencies, and actually a lot of the time at quite a waste of money as well, because a lot of turnarounds, a lot of replanning, and a lot of kind of pausing and holding, which isn't usually the most efficient way of using budget and funds and time. So
yeah. And you prefer Agile?
Personally, I do. I think it's more exciting. And I'm not the kind of person who loves loads of paperwork. So waterfall can be very like documentation heavy, a lot of admin. Whereas Agile, sort of the point of it was to break all that down and to focus on outcomes and output, and you know, innovation as opposed to just integration. So yeah, definitely Agile for me, but they both definitely have a place in the world. So look, I've only got about 10 minutes for questions, so I'm going to try and hurry through. So I want to show you a week in the life of a Microsoft project manager. So that's like a typical week for me. I blocked out all of my customer names because they're both security cleared work, so I need to make sure that you didn't see any of the customers. But fairly busy week actually. It's busier than usual, and you can see we're currently at the Thursday evening. I've highlighted this call in green. But both of my projects at the moment are Agile, they're Scrum. So you're seeing a lot of Scrum ceremonies. Now, our Scrum ceremonies are set activities that we have every sprint cycle or every scrum cycle. So mine are 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks we'll have on the Monday, you'll see sprint planning. And every single day we have a daily stand-up. So between 9 and 10, I have 2 stand-ups with 2 of my projects. In those calls, based off of those planning sessions, we'll essentially ask 3 key questions. We'll say, what are you doing today? What did you do yesterday? And any risks, blockers, or impediments. The idea for me is to jot all those things down, make sure that they're communicated out to the right people, make sure that they're blocked. If they are blocked, they're unblocked, so the work can continue. And ultimately, we're leading up to what we call a sprint review, which is where we do a big show and tell on what we've delivered that sprint. And the idea is we should have completed everything we promised we would have in planning. So we need to be quite careful with what we schedule in for that week. You'll see also a lot of kind of placeholders around project update reports. There's also a lot in there about genuine kind of status reports with clients, monthly reports, resource reviews. So reviewing team members, do they have enough hours? Are we forecasting them right? How are they going to impact budget? All of that sort of stuff, and freeing them up to make sure they can do their work comfortably. You probably see tomorrow we have like a core infrastructure review. So that's typically where we go to a customer, we would say, right, this is where we are in the project, and we would demo a lot of the code and ultimately how that's been deployed, and we would take feedback and questions and help bring it to life for them a little bit. So we try to do that quite frequently with customers because it's easier to understand things once you know them. But going down the list, couple things that you would expect on any given kind of 2-week period are executive steering calls. So that's where you work with program sponsors, you work with domain leadership, you work with kind of critical executive sponsors essentially of the project to look at work completed, any risks and issues, and they would steer the project and make critical decisions on what direction things are going in. So you typically do a big review, you would do a lot of benefits analysis, and you essentially look at the strategy of the project and is it hitting the goals that it promised to hit when you started. So you typically would have that every 2 weeks or a month. Project health reviews, typically where I work at Microsoft, that's an internal call that you'd have half an hour with people from the domain or quality assurance. Again, they would look at work completed, work upcoming, risks, issues, revenue, consumption, loads of different things, and they start questioning, is this a green project? Is it a red project? Are we hitting the milestones that we promised to hit? More broadly, is this satisfying the strategy that was the reason it was signed in the first place, essentially? So we have a lot of discussions around that. As I say, resource and financial reviews, very typical admin stuff to make sure that we're hitting things on time. Public talks, which is what I'm doing now, status reporting and stakeholder briefings, escalations, conflict management, that does happen quite a lot. So ultimately projects do go red. Some people can be unhappy. Sometimes you're falling behind on timelines. Sometimes you're not hitting the scope that was promised or that you said you'd deliver to the client. So ultimately you start having that trade-off with the customer, and you start bringing in people that don't necessarily want to talk to about having a compromise and what we call a go green plan, which is essentially a set of activities to put the project back on track. And typically that would require more budget. So the question then becomes, where do we find budget? That might require more resource. So where do we find resource? Do we find people from inside the business, or do we hire outside of the business and bring people in? So there can be a lot of discussions, a lot of work, a lot of documentation on that. Backlog management. Now, like I say, it's a very agile related task, but managing and prioritizing work, taking a look at hours left in people's tasks, looking at people's capacity, just making sure that the work that we've planned out for that set period, that scrum or sprint period that I just said, is adequate and that we're going to hit it on time and within scope, so that when we go to the review, they're actually happy with what we've done and we can pat ourselves on the back. So that's like a very, very, very quick overview. Obviously we do have a lot of admin to do, we approve hours, obviously we have to forecast hours out, we have to do a lot of invoicing, a lot of purchase orders, a lot of that sort of stuff, a lot of contracting. We're also sort of considered the key relationship manager for projects as well. So we'll sort of have that very loose role of having to manage good relationships with an account at a delivery level, and that can involve loads of different things, and sort of being that lead point of contact to help connect the customer with different people at Microsoft and things like that. Other than that, typically at Microsoft, we love to do a lot of mentoring, a lot of, giving back to the community. So we'll do talks like these ones to help accelerate people's careers and help them get insight into areas that they might not have seen before, and things like that. So each week is very different. We do have those set repeatable sessions, the stand-ups, the plannings, the reviews, but every week we'll bring something different depending on where the project is. If it's green, it's usually fine. If it's red, then it's your week can be very busy. Okay, so I think it's about Q2, so good timing. Commonly used tools and processes. So if we use so much, and a lot of the times maybe our tools aren't the best, but we have to get by with what we've got. 3 tools that we would typically use on any given day. The first is enterprise sales experience. Now this is kind of our one-stop shop for approving labor, forecasting labor, so hours that people are basically booking on projects and forecasting out how many hours they're going to use between a set period. We need to manage their start and end dates. We also have to manage what we call resource requests. So if we need somebody else on the project, basically describing their scope, what skills do they need, and things like that. A lot of subcontractors, how we work with people outside of the business to join the project, how we manage purchase orders and invoices, and also a lot of times we get paid by hitting milestones, so we have to sort of recognize milestones and work with our operations team to recognize that revenue, and we'll do all of that through one tool. So in principle, a good idea that it's all centralized, but yeah, a lot of the times it can be a lot of your day can just be spent in that tool, just organizing things out, so it can be quite administrative. Secondly is Azure DevOps. Now this is the tool that I definitely spend the most of my time in. Now this is a continuous planning tool, but it's also where our technical teams will release code. So you can release infrastructure as code for apps, code for data, code really for anything to manage a technical environment. It's also good for like containerized apps and how we manage and orchestrate applications. So you can imagine in the modern software dev world, especially with things like GitHub, this is definitely sort of the cutting edge way that we deliver solutions at scale. Like I said quite a few times before, when we manage backlogs, we also do that through the tool. So we'll manage a backlog, which is a set of items to ultimately create a product, and that will evolve and change over a very extended period of time. We would then put those into a sprint backlog, and then that's what our team uses to define a period of work for 1 or 2 weeks. Given we only have 1 or 2 weeks, it's important that we monitor burn down. So, are we managing to complete all the work that we set out to do? And if we're over or under planning, then obviously we need to take stock of that. And we need to start kind of refactoring how much work we're bringing into a set period of time. So we'll also do that on the tool. Now, something that's actually really good about it is we can use it as a central reporting tool. So typically you'd be making status reports, you'd be doing a lot of data modeling on loads of different applications and tools. But typically now you can just do this in Azure DevOps. So you can query all of the work that's happening from the team, and actually your customer can look at that whenever they want. So it cuts down the need for constant reporting, and sometimes you have to do like 3 or 4 reporting calls a week. Actually now you might be able to drop that down and just have an offline call, or at least just kind of reference it offline, or at least just have 1 30-minute session. So yeah, it makes it a lot more self-service, a lot more interactive. So in the Agile world, yeah, it's definitely a good way of working. But if you're still in the waterfall mind, then MS Project will probably be your best friend. MS Project is where we would sequence activities from start to finish. So from pre-initiation right down to what are those closing activities in 1 or 2 years' time. We date them, we dependency map them all together. So what needs to happen before another thing can start. Then we start to get a good idea of, right, where are we going to see big high profile risks coming into projects. So you have that holistic view of an end-to-end solution being planned and then integrated and handed over. You'll then get that broad timeline view, and for anybody that ever uses Gantt charts or anything, it's basically just a fancy Gantt chart. And that's typically what we'd use. Even in Agile, it can be handy to use MS Project just to get a very high level view of how you're going to plan out and sequence your sprints. A lot of the time we actually have scaled Agile, which is where we'd have loads of different Scrum teams working in a program. So sometimes having MS Project can be good just to help line up dependencies and to line up the rhythm in which people work. So as I say, Azure DevOps, MS Project, 2 different tools for 2 different needs, but like anything, there's always a reason, time, and a place where they can work together, or you might prefer one or the other. Enterprise sales experience, every customer or every single organization will have a tool similar just to help as essentially kind of like an administrative tool, which is technically what we use. Cool, but I'm pretty much there. It's bang on 10:02, so I actually did quite well for time there. Thanks so much for listening. Obviously, in an hour, I can't do people the justice of kind of giving end to end, you know, huge explanations of everything, but hopefully it gave you a few little points of reference. You can go away and research, as I say, waterfall, agile, look at Azure DevOps, look at things like continuous integration, continuous deployment, continuous planning, look at all that sort of stuff, and you'll be fine. But yeah, hopefully it helps. Happy to take a few questions.
Yeah, we have many questions, and
cool. Let's go.
I wanted to thank Giovanni and Ron because they have the video on, so thank you. And Ron wants to have the microphone on, so I'll let you. Yeah, okay, here we go.
Oh, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes. Hi, Ron.
Yeah. Hey, Ron.
Hello, I'm calling out of New York City right now, so
nice.
Definitely a global squad we got going on. First of all, I want to say that was a great presentation, Jake. It's definitely hard to present a bunch of empty screens, so like I'm really impressed. Do you have any insights for like how you do that? That would be helpful, probably.
Well, was that your question, or
that wasn't the actual question.
Okay, yeah.
The actual question is if you have any insights as to what are like good hard skills to have as a project manager, like if there's certain things like agile is obviously one of them, or if there's other things I should try to learn to be a successful project manager. Like that's the question. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really, really good question. Of course, there are loads of hard skills that I would definitely promote. So first of all, I think financial management is key. So understanding budget, understanding revenue, understanding profit and loss, understanding how to manage a good forecast. It sounds easy in principle, but when you've got 15 people in one project and you've got 4 projects, it can obviously be quite a lot to consider. So yeah, definitely being good with numbers, being good with maths is critical. Obviously, some of the tools we use, you know, Excel. I know it's obviously everyone kind of it's quite a meme now, isn't it? Like, oh, you better be good at Excel. But yeah, if you are good at Excel, then 100% you will thrive. Obviously, it depends what industry you're going into, but technical skills are always really important. I don't think it's a prerequisite to be a good project manager, but a lot of the time to know a bit about the world or solution you're delivering will take you a long way in terms of being able to articulate updates, being able to understand risks, blockers, especially when they're technical blockers, would take you a long way. So we typically find that a technical project manager, if they have the soft skills as well, usually have the skills to thrive in product management and in agile. So yeah, 100% technical skills, and obviously a deep understanding on industry and on customers. So if you know a lot about fashion, if you know a lot about retail or manufacturing, if you know a lot about a certain industry, and you know, if you know a lot about economics as well, macroeconomics, and yeah, those skills can get you quite far as well.
Nice, thank you.
No worries. It's a very good question though.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Jake. And we have another hand up. Anis, it's your turn.
Thank you. Sorry, let me just turn on my camera. First
Hi.
of all, hi, Jake. Thanks so much.
Hello.
That was really helpful.
No worries.
Thank you. Ron kind of already asked partially my question, and you've already touched on it really, but I think I was just going to ask about the fact that you were saying that you didn't want to be technical, but it does sound like to do what you're doing, you do need to be to an extent technical. From what you were saying about your background, it doesn't sound like, I was just basically going to ask if you feel like, yeah, a certain amount of technical knowledge is needed, and if for you that wasn't interested in being technical, was there a way, how did you go about making sure that you still had that technical knowledge without actually becoming a coder or architect or
yeah. No, fantastic question. And yeah, kind of similar to what I said to Ron. So being technical isn't a prerequisite. It will definitely help in some areas, but it won't get you all the way through the gate in others. You know, to be a project manager and to be an effective one, especially in the modern day, you have to understand people. You know, you have to understand what drives people, what influences people. You have to know how to ask the right questions. So you might not understand technically the deep fabric of what's gone wrong, but you might know actually theoretically, right, how can I ask and how can I figure out what they need? It's kind of like asking a baby, like, actually, okay, what can I do to make you stop crying? And you kind of just will get a picture. So with technical skills as well, it can be with technical issues as well, it can be quite important, because I had a lot of imposter syndrome when I joined my role, that actually I didn't know technically a lot of what was happening, but you start to learn. People have been 30 years in, ran strategic programs with very technical projects, but actually they just knew how to ask the right questions. And that was the advice that I got when I'd first joined. But it's also about knowing, right, what outcome are we driving, right? And what scope are we trying to hit in 6 to 8 months? And how can I actually build relationships with their sponsor, their project manager, some of their end users, so I can understand, right, what are their requirements? What does success look like for them? And then how can I make that my job every time when I get out of bed, to make sure that I'm driving that? And the last thing I'll add is, we have when you're on a project, you have very skilled people around you. At least you'd hope you will. And if you do, a good architect, good consultants, good devs, they will know how to frame the conversation to make it appropriate for a project manager. So yeah, put it this way. Projects are managed all the time, and I doubt all of them are very technical. So yeah, it's not always a hard and fast rule, but hopefully that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, that is. Thank you.
No worries.
Okay, so we have more questions on the chat. Giovanni says, it seems that Agile is more focused on soft skills, while Waterfall on hard skills. What do you think?
Yeah, it really depends. I think if you're coming in from more of a Scrum Master position, then I think having a close affinity to Scrum, because Scrum has very set principles on how you deliver a Scrum project. So as long as you can follow them, be an advocate and a promoter for those principles, then yeah, I think it's a very soft skill. It's a very soft skill sort of role, because in one sense you're enabling collaboration. You have to be a very, very, very effective communicator. You're a cheerleader for that group of people as well, and obviously you're advocating for the set principles of working, which requires a set kind of scope of skills as well. So yeah, I would say it is a bit more soft skill driven. With Waterfall, I think you have to be very, very, very hyper organized, very high attention to detail, be very accustomed to managing a very, very, very high budget in the hundreds of thousands to millions, and obviously the risk that comes being associated with that kind of budget can require a lot of oversight, and kind of managing resource plans with numerous people as well. Can obviously be quite stressful. So yeah, 100% Agile, Waterfall, they're very, very, very different skills, but in essential driving two different kinds of outcomes. So something to bear in mind with how that would frame your learning. But 100% do a bit of research offline. YouTube's always a really good place to learn these things firsthand. So yeah, just have a look at a few resources online, and you'll start to see the common ground between what makes a good project manager when they do Waterfall and what makes a good project manager when they do Agile.
Okay, and he also asked if you can give some tips for someone who is approaching project management.
Yeah, I think just learn as much as you can. I think the best way you can learn is by doing or by seeing in practice. So if you know anyone that's a project manager, start networking, seeing if you can get on a few calls. I definitely found it hard to grasp until I actually started getting involved in doing it. Sometimes the best way to learn is by doing, and you can read and in your head you can have it distilled as much as you like, but actually when you get into the reality of it, it can be something completely different. I think for a lot of us, when we joined as project managers, the best way of learning was to manage something end to end. So actually starting something up and closing it, because then you have that point of reference. But my advice would be, if you're looking to get into project management, there's a wealth of material online. I would look at scrum.org. Where you can essentially, that's where the Scrum Guide lives, which is kind of the backbone of how we run Agile projects. So look at that, read that. There's loads of online training material on Scrum as well. Look at the Project Management Institute and start looking at some resources there. Hopefully you'll be okay. Yeah, so a mixture of shadowing, resources, and just getting involved where you can would be good.
Thank you, Jay. And Erika. Do you want to finish with Giovanni? Okay.
Yeah, we have Thomasin, and that has a question that is related to this kind of experience and learn everything. And he asked, I am thinking about doing a master in project management. How helpful do you think this would be? Or would you say experience in smaller projects and working your way up would be more beneficial?
Yeah, I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to dictate what one's going to be best, because I don't know what a master's in project management would entail. I think 100% the academia, the theory is so important. I think if you're going to go on things that are strategic, are very highly important, managing multi-million-pound budgets, you know, I think the more education you can get, the better. And obviously, there's no rush after that master's just to get in and do something that might be that wouldn't be beneficial for you. You know, I think even if you do a master's, I still think you're going to want to pick something up small and build up your confidence. I still am a firm believer that the best way of learning is by doing. So I would 100% recommend the master's, but I definitely have something in the back of the mind, which is to try and get involved with something as soon as possible. When I first joined, I had about 6 months of learning. And on my first day, I really didn't even know what a project was. And by 6 months, I was managing 2 projects with 2 of our enterprise customers. So yeah, best way is by doing. And once you've closed one project yourself, you know, your confidence, you'll be able to do anything. So hopefully that helps.
Great.
Okay, Jake, last from Vanessa. She says,
Yeah.
I would like to work as a project manager. I have a bachelor degree in psychology and a master degree in marketing and communication. I have also some experiences in marketing and sales. Have you got some advices to give me about how improve my curriculum in a way that could be interesting for recruiters, course to take or programs to know?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I think everything you've done, like all of the subjects and all of the courses, I'm sure you've learned a hell of a lot. Like, you know, marketing, you know, projects always come down to communications. Doesn't matter how good you are at 9 out of the 10 field areas for project management. If you don't communicate anything, then yeah, it's a dangerous place to be. So yeah, I'm glad to hear you've been doing marketing communications, you've been doing sales, so you probably know how to be front facing. You're probably fairly confident, and that's also very important. In terms of articulating all of that, I would start thinking about what are those key skills that you've gained? What are those key learnings in each of those steps? What are those things that you've done which have helped you orchestrate something? Have you delivered something end to end? Have you managed people? How have you managed people? Where have examples like that gone well, or have they gone bad? What kind of person were you when you did projects at university? Were you that person that actually got involved and would communicate, would delegate out, or were you that person that didn't? That wasn't kind of proactive in doing that sort of stuff. So I think it's getting an understanding of yourself and what are those key qualities you have. And then look at job descriptions of project management. You know, at Microsoft, we probably have certain ways that we articulate it, but all across loads of different sectors, you know, they will articulate it in different ways. So have a look and see how best you can start cross-referencing the common materials to what you've experienced. In terms of materials or resources, as I say, Project Management Institute, the PMI is really important. There's a course called Certified Associate Project Management, which is a kind of, if your entry level, is obviously good to take. But all of the materials and the learning parts are really good. You then got the Project Management Professional, the PMP. So if you're a few years in, you can take a look at that. And yeah, if you're looking more at Scrum and Agile, scrum.org, definitely the best place to start. And there's loads of learning material there.
Perfect. Thank you, Jake.
Pleasure.
It has been a pleasure, Jake.
Yeah.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I hope some of it helped. I know I can have a tendency to ramble on. But yeah, hopefully, you know, even if you've just got a little bit, that's good enough for me. And yeah, if you ever want to follow up or any more questions or anything, connect with me on LinkedIn and we can, carry the conversation on.
Perfect.
Yes, the recording will be available tomorrow. Yes, you will receive an email and you will have the recording. And Jake, thank you for bringing here your experience.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. See you in the next online experiences.
Bye bye.
Cool. Thanks. See ya.
Hi, Jake.